holiday tea blending, herbal healing in winter. Merry meet everyone and welcome back. I'm Witch Hazel and I like to combine the practical side of witchcraft with a little bit more in-depth spiritual practice. So today our theme is going to be tea. I know a lot of you really enjoyed my tea blending video I did a while back, so I thought I would bring up the theme again for the holiday season because it is very common at this time of year, it's December at the moment, to really get into tea, especially spiced tea. We love the idea of warm drinks at this time of year. So that's what we're going to discuss. I'm going to talk about a very, very brief kind of vague history of tea and then go into tea and its healing side, its healing practices, and delve into the spiritual side of tea and tea blending. All of this is going to be a very basic overview. Also, stick around to the end because I will be providing a tea recipe that I have put together for the holidays for my own enjoyment based off of what I currently have in the cupboard. So let's get started. History of tea, shall we? Tea, as far as I could find, has its origins in use and most of its farming, I guess you could call it, in China. So China, Asia in general, has kind of the monopoly on tea, but you had it as a staple there in that region of the world, and then gradually over time, tea made its way out into basically every other facet of the world via things like the Silk Roads, the trade routes, spices, and therefore teas and other goods such as those were very common among these trade routes. So you have this use of tea kind of migrating all over the world from Asia, the parts of Asia where it was originally known and used. As a drink, therefore, tea is known everywhere. We've already mentioned China is, if you think of what we know of the tea drinking countries these days, you have China, very associated with all types of tea. Japan, again, all types of tea. Also, especially, I think, in my mind anyway, green tea, things like matcha tea, and we'll get into things like tea ceremonies later. You have India, also very well known for tea. Chai tea is a big one that we know from India. And then you get into places like, I believe it's Morocco. I know it's Middle Eastern, but the mint tea. I love that mint tea with highly sugared mint tea, but very tasty, and that gets into its own little ritual. And then, of course, we have the British Isles and their association with tea. Probably the most famous tea drinkers of the Western world, right? From Great Britain, of course, the United States had tea for a hot second. We became coffee drinkers after the Boston Tea Party, but it was a part of our history as well. And tea is a very interesting catalyst to how the United States became such a big coffee country. So all of these things, let me check my notes, make sure I didn't leave anybody off. Oh, South America. How could I forget them? I loved the mate culture that they have in South America. I know it from Argentina, but I know it's also very big in the surrounding areas like Uruguay, especially because they border each other. But the tea drinking of this very bitter mate tea out of the gourds, right? So as you can see, tea is essentially worldwide. So this brings us then into the idea that tea has multiple functions. Yes, it is a drink that people around the world enjoy, but because it has become, or it has been so prevalent, and because it's made from herbs, plants, right? At some point along the way, tea also developed significance in terms of healing and spirituality. We'll start with the healing. Because, as we know, and as witches always are interested in, herbs help us to heal. Herbs can be used medicinally to strengthen the body, to prevent illness, and also to help cure illness if we are sick. So once human beings figured that out, then tea became an essential part of that process. Because if you think of the ways in which we use herbs for healing, there are dried herbs that we can mix into pills or that we can mix into food. That was probably some of the first ways that we used these herbs, just kind of ingesting as a food. Very often when we get sick, maybe our digestion doesn't work so hot, eating the herbs is sometimes a little difficult. So another very obvious use would be in tea making, because very early on we would not yet have been able to make things like extracts, which require some form of alcohol or glycerin. We didn't have those things back in the day. What we did have was water. We could boil the water, we could steep the tea. We could simmer the roots and the seeds, we could make tea. And in this way, we could also ingest the healing properties of the herbs. So tea is very important. It is a staple of healing practices because it has been used in that way for so long. And it's not really that much of a jump to go from tea as a drink, tea as a healing drink, into tea as a spiritually enhancing drink. Because what we would have noticed as we were playing around with these herbs is that they have a distinct effect on the body. Healing, yes, but also we could relate this to the effect that herbs have on the healthy body. So for example, we may have noticed that certain teas like lavender, chamomile, etc., these are calming teas. And when we talk about spiritual practices, like the one that I keep bringing up is meditation, because everyone knows about it, right? We associate that with a sense of calmness. What we're trying to do is quiet the mind, steady the body, and sometimes we have a difficult time doing that on our own. So the addition of tea that has calming properties will help with that. The same thing goes for herbs and teas that might have some other more altering effects. You could have, witches like mugwort tea. Mugwort tea is supposed to help enhance the psychic abilities, the abilities to have maybe prophetic dreams, or again, to get into that meditative state, but also to get the psyche working a little bit differently. So we have now both aspects of how to use teas, and they're both based off of the same thing as the herbal effect on the body. So from this then, we can also, once we realize that tea can be used to enhance spiritual experience, right? Again, we as human beings, we like to create ritual, right? We like to create routines around things. So many cultures, many regions will also have more ritualized aspects of tea and tea making. One of the most well-known, that at least that I hear about here, especially since we have a little tea house in the gardens next door that does tea ceremonies, is the Japanese tea ceremony. There is also a very nice little explanatory video at our art museum in the Japanese art section showing this tea ceremony. So human beings have always kind of had this inclination to create a little ritual around tea making. And in the case of something like the tea ritual from Japan, it all has to do with being focused, being mindful of what you're doing. It's not just make the tea. It's thinking about, why are you making the tea? What are you doing? How is this process connecting you to some bigger purpose? And the same goes, I'm sure, for every other culture and every other person that has a tea ritual. I do know that many witches who like to enjoy a little tea in their rituals will create something similar, maybe not as in-depth and dramatic as an official tea ceremony, but they will create a little mini sacred space for creating the tea and be very mindful of every step of the process and just make it a little bit more meaningful by doing that. Okay, so now that we have gotten kind of the overview of tea as a drink slash healing item slash spiritual enhancer, what about that recipe that I promised you? Okay, so I went and looked in the cupboard in the kitchen. I said, I want to make a holiday tea. What can I use? I have an Earl Grey tea that I really like. I have that on hand. I had lavender and chamomile. I have some of my all-time favorite spices in the wintertime are cardamom, cinnamon, anise, and fennel. So I have all of those available. So I said, let me mix and match. And here's what I came up with. Remember from that previous video, the nice thing about tea making is you don't have to be exact. We will use parts. And this part can be whatever you're using as a measurement. So you can increase or decrease the amount of tea that you're making without having to do mathematical alterations. So 1 part in my recipe is going to be 1 teaspoon, okay? But you can alter that however you like. So I am going to be using 4 parts Earl Grey as the base. And this is going to help to give a protective and grounding energy to my tea. Then I'm going to have 1/2 part cinnamon for its warmth and the help with the circulation. I tend to run cold, especially in the winter time. 3 cardamom pods, slightly crushed. And let's see, another 1/2 part of ginger. Ginger is also very energizing and warming, good for the season. It's also very good for the digestive system. So I tend to lean toward anything that helps the digestion, which I mentioned the whole reasons for that in that last video. And it's also very cleansing, ginger. So that's always helpful. Then we get to the anise and the fennel. I will probably do a 1/2 part of each of those, but you can combine those into a 1/2 part total if you like. And these again are very good for the digestion. They're very balancing and they are just tasty for the season. They kind of bring out the theme of the season. I'll add in a pinch of lavender. Lavender tends to have a pretty potent flavor, so that's one to be a little careful with. And then chamomile, I can do 1 whole part of chamomile. Chamomile is very mild It's again, both of these, lavender and chamomile, very calming, very soothing, very nice for the season, especially when you're stuck indoors if the weather isn't great. They also tend to have associations with love and warmth. Chamomile is very fun because of its color. It's that bright yellow of the chamomile is associated with the sun. So during the dark depths of winter, this is a nice one to add in to kind of brighten up our tea mix and our, what do you call that? Brighten the spirits. There you go. So that is going to be my recipe. I will try to write that out a little bit nicer for you in the description, or I'll have some sort of a link, but however I do it will be in the description. Now you have two options for how to make this. The first one is you're going to want to simmer all of the seed items first, because those need a little bit more time. So you're going to add to your water the spices like the cardamom, fennel, anise. You can add the cinnamon and ginger in as well. All of those, simmer them for up to 5 minutes. Get a very gentle simmer going. And then shut off the water, add in the teas. The teas, if they're flowers or leaves, they don't need as much time. So just add those in with the heat shut off, let it steep for a couple of minutes, about 3 minutes or so. Then take the whole mix and strain it into your teacup and enjoy. Your second option, which I like to do once in a while, is to actually simmer and steep all of these items in some milk. It's a little bit heavier, it's a little bit more filling and fulfilling in my mind in the holiday season, and it's a nice little change. So you could try that as well. Just be careful not to scald the milk. And lastly, if you are not a fan of black tea and would rather have something completely herbal, you can leave out the black tea, and I would up the chamomile. You can up the lavender a little bit, not too much, but up the chamomile and use that as your base, then add the other herbs and spices into it. So do let me know if you try out this recipe and what you think of it. Also, if you tweak it based off of what you have in the kitchen, I would like to know what recipes you find to be the best for this holiday season. I hope you enjoyed that, everyone. Thank you for hanging out with me. If you liked the video, don't forget to like the video, subscribe so you don't miss future similar videos. And until the next time, everyone, blessed be.